So here we are in Vila de Conde, or is it Vila de Conde?
Vila do Conde or Vila do Conde?
Vila do Conde.
Vila do Conde.
Vila do Conde in Portugal for the Curtas Short Film Festival, which has got underway now.
24th edition.
24th edition, and it's happening in the middle of, obviously the football was last night, so everybody is now deeply hungover and going to have a, hopefully drag themselves into the cinema today to see some short films. I've never been to this festival before. You've never been to this festival before. I have looked through the programme and I've seen several of the films. Looks like a good selection. And some of the films, I mean, there's actually one of them is sort of in my top 10 of the year, which is I'm in the competition jury of the experimental section. And one of the films, which I'm very much keen to see again, is Engram of Returning by Daiichi Saito. So I know that there are some extremely good films in this programme, also some Austrian films. And short film festivals have become quite an established part.
They've become a thing.
Become a thing, part of the calendar. This is the 24th one that they've had here. Obviously big ones at Oberhausen and Krakow and places like this, Clermont-Ferrand. What is it that you like particularly about short film festivals, and how do you think short films are generally treated in the world of film?
Well, they facilitate, firstly, my increasing need to watch short films because of my terrible attention span. But I was at a short film festival last month, Hamburg short film festival, my first time there, and it's a very different experience attending a short film festival as in comparison to a traditional film festival, which also screen shorts. I mean, Rotterdam Film Festival, the shorts section there has an identity in and of itself, and is branded as such, as distinct from the overall programme of Rotterdam. I think it's done very well to establish that reputation. But I say it's very different because you're not watching, you're not sitting down to watch a feature-length film, you're sitting down to watch a series of films, and that can do funny things to your mental rhythms of having to go back to square one, if you like, and readjust to this new narrative or this new artwork in quick succession. So in terms of curatorial logistics, shorts festivals can be extremely difficult to program and manage because you need to time it well, these screenings, and you need to get it right so that people aren't getting agitated, bored as audiences, because this festival is a public festival, it's public oriented, and you need to cater for that. And how you do that, there are numerous ways in which to do it. I think some shorts festivals are better than others, and from my limited experience of attending them, Curtas Quito, which you didn't mention, in Santiago, is a very good festival in this regard. And this festival, actually, one thing I did note is that they are a lot more flexible, and I think in a positive sense, with regard to what is not a short, because we have films in this festival ranging up to an hour in duration, which is pushing the boundary into mid-length, what we would call a medium-length feature or medium-length short. And I think that can only be a good thing, because it's kind of breaking free of the traditional ramifications or limitations within which you exhibit films.
And of course, at the minute, also in France, there's the Fid Marseille Festival,
Yeah.
where shorts are put into the main competition section along with medium, and I think there's one film this year which is like 2.5 hours, and yet there are films in there which are 20 minutes. So what that competition is doing is saying films are films regardless of length. One of the films that you mentioned, 59 minutes, is one of those Illinois parables.
The Illinois parables,
yeah,
which we did speak 3 videos ago now at the Berlinale, because
I still haven't seen it.
Well, this is your chance to see it this week. But this was my favourite film that I saw in Berlinale this year.
It was in the forum section?
Forum expanded maybe, though I can't be sure of that. And it remains the best film I've seen this year, and I mention that because we are, halfway through, or the first week into July now, so we're at the midpoint of 2016, and so people are beginning in these circles to talk about the best films that they've seen so far this year as a natural discussion point.
Especially if they've been to Cannes.
Especially if they've been to Cannes. I haven't really seen that many great films this year, I must say. The Illinois Parables is the only one I would say that I've genuinely been on board with and liked wholeheartedly.
Deborah Stratman, her previous film was Hacked Circuit.
Hacked Circuit, which is
an excellent short about the conversation, the Coppola film. I think it's about, how long is the film? About 12 minutes?
12 minutes.
And it's like the camera goes into a studio where they're doing Foley work on some kind of restoring the soundtrack.
Foley artists creating the sound design of a film, and it's the conversation that we see is the film being made within that film.
And then the camera kind of goes on a little tour of the block. I don't actually know what's happening in this film, but that doesn't bother me. And I'm sure if I read interviews or read very clever critics, the answers would be given.
Yeah.
But I'm actually quite happy to kind of get. I know there's something going on, but it's a bit like the conversation itself, which is about a man who knows something's happening. He knows there's some kind of a plot, and even at the end, he never really quite finds out what it is. So in a way, it's quite good that this has mysteries. But how does Illinois Parables? Does it in any way develop from that, or is it an extension? Is it visibly the work of the same person?
It's difficult to say. I mean, in short, no. But that speaks to the wide range of artistic interests that Deborah Stratman obviously has.
And it's about the history of Illinois.
The Illinois Parables is a history of Illinois, starting from I think the 9th century up to around mid-1980s, when the murder of Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers movement, and it's 11 chapters across 59 minutes in chronological order that detail this history. And I wrote about it when I saw it at the Berlinale, and I mentioned that it may be a state-specific version of Prophet Motive and the Whispering Wind by John Vito, which was itself an adaptation of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And I mean, I don't want to impose that comparison too much onto the work, because it should speak for itself and shouldn't.
Because Prophet Motive is 60 minutes, 55 minutes?
If that, it's not 47, something like that. But it's another monuments and memorials film, we can say, but it's beyond that. It's reconstructing certain historical incidents, and it's utilising archive footage in a way that I think is profitable, and it's an intellectually stimulating film, and the landscapes, as a landscape film as well, it operates on its own terms, and it's very, very impressive. And I haven't seen it since February, and I'm disappointed that not only do I leave, because I have to go to Fid Marseille tomorrow, so I'm not going to get a chance to see it again, at least here, but I'm also disappointed because I leave before the experimental section of this festival begins, which you're on the jury of. Now, how many of the films have you already seen? And I know that you're a jury member, so you can't really say what you think about them.
Well, it's a matter of public record that I think Engram of Returning is one of the best films I've seen this year. So I'm not going to go back through my Twitter and website and take out all references to films that I'm on the jury of. And my enthusiasm for that film.
Where did you see it?
I saw it in Edinburgh, actually, just last month.
Okay, part of the Black Box section, was it?
Experimental section.
So this is another section dedicated primarily to shorts. Experimental films is its main remit, and it operates within the traditional, the oldest film festival in the world, or longest running.
The longest continued running one goes back to 1947.
And it has it has an identity that is distinct, and in some ways, within certain circles, higher reputation than the festival itself.
And also, it's put in one very small cinema room, the smallest cinema room that they've got, which is usually full. And it is, I would much prefer that this section was sort of put in the bigger cinemas, so everybody, because it becomes a sort of self-selecting little club or black box.
Was it concentrated this year to one weekend? Because in previous years it has been to its...
it was, towards the end of the festival,
Okay.
And they had Lizzie Borden there with the regrouping. And anyway, Engram of Returning, which was by Daiichi Saito, was the best film I saw in Edinburgh by quite some way, and it's 18 minutes.
Okay.
And I include shorts and everything in that, the best film. It's a kind of abstract images with a jazz soundtrack, and he is Japanese, but he's based in Montreal, and there seems to be a lot of very good experimental stuff going on in Montreal. People like Alexandra Larose, whose film Brouillard Passage 14, I think is a masterpiece, great film, and Stephen Brumer, because I was in A Coruña a couple of weeks ago, and he's from Toronto, but there's definitely a Canadian strength of experimental cinema, which seems to be particularly focused in Quebec, as is the features. You know, Quebec is the most stimulating, I think, place in North America in terms of cinema. But
You
it
were
helps
in.
that they get the funding from various governmental institutions. It's not accidental that Quebec people just happen to be brilliant filmmakers.
You were in A Coruña for another short film festival.
Yes, it was the S8 it's experimental films. I think it's pretty much all short films. And it's funny you were saying about watching films in shorts programs. They showed these films by Stephen Brumer, and it tended to be the shorter they were, the better. They were very focused, and his use of music was particularly apposite. And there was one that ran 68 seconds and one that ran 78 seconds, both made on 16mm. And
So they were short shorts.
very short shorts.
We should put our
Grass.
shorts up to demonstrate our preference for short shorts.
Like an early 80s British footballer. And they were shown on 16mm, and as soon as they finished, I was like, I really want to watch that again. And it would have been the easiest thing. And I'm actually doing a shorts program in Croatia, and I'm going to say to the projectionist, just keep showing that every now and again. And I think that would be something you can do with shorts. You know, you can rewatch a short over and over again. If you're watching it on, because obviously a lot of people now will watch shorts on their computers and on their, Vimeo and stuff like this. And you get to the end of it, and you could watch that 10 times in the time that takes you to.
Well, let me ask you a question, because, like me, you are religious with your retention of lists and updating your best of lists during the year and throughout, your personal history of cinema. Now, your yearly top 10s, which are a thing, okay, let's stick with that. The average running time of the films that constitute these yearly top 10s seems to be decreasing each year. Now, is this a reflection, do you think, of a genuine increase in quality at the moment in short films in comparison to features, or are you being deliberately contrarian in trying to promote short films and make them part of your personal contribution to critical discourse?
Well, as I've been going to more film festivals, and I started going to film festivals outside Britain 15 years ago in Estonia, and I have increasingly started to watch more short films and realised that there's a whole kind of world out there which isn't getting covered and isn't getting written about and stuff like that. But it's also genuine sort of enthusiasm, and also it's like a philosophical position that, like, I don't see any reason why you can't compare a 6-hour Lav Diaz film and a 78-second Stephen Brumer film. Or even in Graz there was a 17-second short, of which 14 seconds were black screen, and in the middle of that there was 3 seconds of a shot of the Atlantic. It was called Atlantic 35. Now,
that's not a film though, is it?
It's a cinematic experience. It's moving image. How short can a short be? If a 1-second film can be shown, it's still a film. And if what you're doing with that 1 second is of sufficient artistic merit, then I don't really see why we draw artificial boundaries. But even now, if I look at my website, it does list top 10 features and then shorts are underneath it. But I did a kind of top 12, top 13 of the year, of which 9 are less than an hour. 9 will be considered shorts. It's like anything in criticism. It's to what degree is that a manifestation of my personal taste, or is it that I think that there is something about people working in short cinema which is genuinely of a higher general merit? I often think it's about length, because within traditional cinema, what we might call mainstream cinema, dominant cinema, as James Benning would call it, basically it's like the length of a football game. You've got 90 minutes, maybe you've got 2 hours, you might go to 3 hours, but basically the amount of variation that the directors do is you've got to make the film at least 70 minutes to get it into festivals, but don't go more than 2 hours unless you're really established. So you generally get people aiming for that thing, and maybe the material isn't suitable for 90 minutes. Whereas with a short, if I have an idea to express in 20 seconds, or 15 minutes, or 48 minutes, there's that much flexibility. And because it isn't a commercially driven medium, the expression of the artist, which is what we're all interested in. I mean, it's obviously interesting to see how an artist like, for instance, Paul Verhoeven or Michael Mann or I don't know, some people would say James Cameron or even Michael Bay, how they can express themselves within the Hollywood system, within the Hollywood structure, the old traditional meaning of the auteur theory.
Vulgar auteurism.
Let's not go down that vulgar avenue. But so that is interesting to see how Michael Mann deals with it and comes out with a masterpiece like Heat or Miami Vice or something like Black Hat, which is a sort of an interesting failure. But then within shorts, to me, they just don't have to make those compromises. And I don't think I think there are philosophical and even empirical objective grounds for saying that in terms of artistic expression as filmmakers, in a short, you are more likely to get the vision of the individual transferred to the result without compromise. Because again, if you're making Miami Vice, for example, Michael Mann, just by the nature of that, has to deal with 1,000 people under him. He has to deal with Jamie Foxx.
So shorts are a more inherently more local practice.
It's easier to do it as a one man or one woman thing. And as I say, Stephen Broomer, as far as I can gather, he goes out with his 8mm camera, and it's all done very, very artisan and very, very directly. And he is able. Some people are able to make a career and make a living out of it. Maybe they have to teach and things like that. If you're working in Austria, there is a whole funding structure, an exhibition structure, which means you can pretty much be a full-time experimental filmmaker.
Which hasn't opened up overnight, though. I mean, these things are gradual and
that is developed. You can trace it back. Peter Czerkaski wrote the book about Film Unframed about avant-garde cinema in Austria, where he says this is a specific thing which is derived from Vienna's artistic, intellectual, cultural history, which goes back hundreds of years, and then how cinema in Austria developed after the Second World War, and how immediately important, interesting international filmmakers very quickly emerged, and then started to create and have it that this way of making art is as valid as writing an opera. Really, I mean, if you actually look at the budget that film gets in Austria, it's a tiny little sliver. But because the whole pie is so much bigger, because in Austria culture is the big deal in a way that it isn't really in any other country that I know of to that degree, and certainly in Vienna. Even if you're just getting a sliver of that Sasha taught, that can be enough to live on, unless you're going around in a Rolls Royce eating caviar, which most experimental filmmakers, in my experience, don't. But
it's interesting because you and I are going to participate in a panel discussion this afternoon at this festival about criticism and its relationship to shorts, and I think one of the first questions that we've been primed to prepare for is going to deal with the formation of canons and the canon, and how shorts have always been kind of excluded from that, and how we begin to incorporate that. And I think that has something to do with, as you mentioned, the standardization of narrative durations for films, which became standardized out of financial need, and in order to create an industry that was sellable, right, marketable. And shorts obviously are kind of lie outside of that.
Unless, like, for instance, like that Beyonce Lemonade thing, which
or Rihanna's Bitch Better Have My Money.
Yeah, or also last week there was that one, Gosh, or whatever it was called, Oh Gosh, which is a pop video, and like that. Things like that will be in people's top 10 of the year. Yeah, probably.
Haven't you started to include like vines?
In my top 10, in my shorts kind of list, there is a 7-second YouTube
of a dog stopping somebody playing the guitar.
Somebody started playing Wonderwall on the guitar, and the dog puts its paw out and stops it, and it's called when your mate starts playing Wonderwall on Night Out or something like that. And it's 7 seconds, and it's perfect. It could not be improved. Jean-Luc Godard could not improve that. Michael Mann could not do that any better. So the fact that it was made by Rat Boy's dad, speech marks. I mean, Rat Boy's dad may never be heard of ever again. I might be Rat Boy's dad. You might be Rat Boy's dad.
It's interesting though, because I'm not Rat Boy's dad. I'm Rat Boy. It's interesting though, because how we begin to incorporate shorts into our own personal discussion and advocating them, not necessarily as great in themselves, because obviously like most things, most shorts are bad. I think most shorts are too long, actually. But because you're not just advocating shorts as a personal philosophy. It's a certain kind of short, let's say the more experimental strand. And I mean, I have very little time, or tend to have very little time, for what we would call fictional narrative shorts, because they are made a lot of them are made, at least in the UK, as a result or an outcome of, script writing schemes, and are funded and developed by agencies that exist just to keep those agencies in jobs, and they have their own bureaucratic procedures.
And they are nearly always seen as stepping stones to a bigger and better things.
Yep. And calling cards.
And quite often they'll be obviously either like for instance Whiplash, which is as we know, an utterly abysmal excuse for a film.
Okay, but that was expanded from a short.
That was a short, and it was obviously, if people kind of went for that mood and that kind of vibe, it was like this could work. And also again, it's like the acting is generally not up to scratch, and I just find them, they're just very, very conventional in a depressing way. And you often find they're made by somebody fresh out of film school, and you think, if this is what the people who are meant to be the next generation, why on earth are you got two people sitting in some boring room in London?
Yeah. But what I was going to mention is, I dipped for the first time in more than a year a few days ago into Sight and Sound and started reading it. And Nick Pinkerton had written an article on wanting to expand the critical language, asking for an expansion of the critical devices that we currently use, expanding them, and also to figure out ways in which to reconfigure critical language. And it coincided with me reading another article this week, a blog post, about that defended a piece in the a kind of an anti-intellectual piece that was kind of mirroring sarcastically the tropes that are prevalent among academic writings. And it was defending the kinds of tropes that we come across in academic writing.
And was Pinkerton saying that we've got to get away from the academic way of approaching?
Pinkerton wasn't. This was a different article to Pinkerton's, but I suspect it was kind of no, he wasn't trying to get away from it. If anything, I think these two articles kind of overlapped and coincided because the other one, whose author I don't recall, said only a malleable language can be a truly critical one. Right, so that was calling for, in defence of the kinds of neologisms that academics come up with in order to describe works, which I know that in the past you've expressed having a problem with, and I know that you're more in favour of a.
I don't mind neologisms.
You're more in favour of a kind of a knee-jerk intuition, if you like. You think with the gut and shoot from the hip.
Reaction. Well, I think one thing with shorts is at the end of it, I kind of know if it's a good short or a bad short. Next. Oh, that one's better. Oh, at the end of 6 shorts, that's the best one.
But my question, because you mentioned Rihanna and Beyonce, and Pinkerton also mentions it, and where do you draw the line? Like, I mean, do trailers count as shorts? Trailers as a standardized, coded narrative form can also express a certain creativity.
Are they films?
I mean,
that's the thing. Is a trailer or a pop video?
I'm asking the question with a certain film in mind, because you mentioned Michael Mann, and actually one of the best shorts I ever saw before I started even to get into films seriously was a trailer for a feature coming out starring Benicio del Toro as some kind of gambling addict, and he was driving a Mercedes-Benz. And years later,
I don't remember this,
and it was called Lucky Star.
Oh, yes.
And then years later, I realised that the film didn't exist. I was like, whatever happened to that film? It looked great, and I really wanted to see it. And it was actually just an advert for Mercedes-Benz, shot by Michael Mann. Where do you draw the line? I mean, is that a film? I guess it is.
Well, I don't think you really have to draw the line. What I thought you were going to say was the trailer for Miami Vice.
Okay.
Which I think is better than the film.
Right.
And it starts with the Linkin Park Numb.
Yep.
And it's just because you don't have to go through, because Miami Vice is a very silly film, as Brian Cox would say if he was here. It's kind of daft. There's a lot that's kind of wrong. I mean, I like Miami Vice very much, but the trailer is kind of like all the good bits made into one.
Yeah, it's like a mashup.
2-minute film, and it's all to that one song. And you just kind of think, whoever's cut that should be editing the film.
Do you think, or suspect Mann had an involvement in that trailer?
Well, Michael Mann is a notoriously attention detail person. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a control freak. And so one would think that he probably oversaw everything like that. The other one that I always think of is All the Boys Love Mandy Lane. Okay. Which is a pretty cheesy horror film, American horror film with Amber Heard, who's very much in the news at the minute. And the trailer it's done to Sealed with a Kiss, which is a song that I like very much. And again, the trailer is just brilliantly edited, atmospheric. You're desperate to watch the film. You watch the film, and you realise that the film really isn't particularly good, and you realise how brilliant the trailer is, because the trailer sells you one story, just completely seamlessly, and then the film actually does something completely different. And that was the British trailer, which I found out was edited by so-and-so. I mean, did I put that in my top of the year? Well, I wasn't really doing a kind of list of shorts, but, you know, it's like you watch an advert for breakfast cereal. You know, if that's as good as the next Jason Bourne film, you know, are you doing your duty if you don't put that in your top 10? But it's like the knee-jerk thing when people say, what's the best movie of the year? You know, let's say it's on Twitter or Facebook, or here we are at the midway point. 98% of those are always features. You know, and it's like their definition of the year is what's come out in the United States in this period. And I'm looking at it thinking, well, I haven't really seen that.
And
much
then you get the smart
States.
Alex who include television shows.
Yeah, and it's like,
But it's all screen-based media. Pinkerton calls it lens-based. But
I think certainly shorts is the obvious one in terms of, well, there's two questions. Should shorts be in the canon? I think one or two shorts are, like on Chien Andalou is 28 minutes.
La Jetée.
La Jetée of Chris Marker. Those shorts would be like in Sight and Sound's list of the greatest films. A lot of people would have voted for them. They'll be in there. So do we say that the canon should be expanded to include more shorts? Or do we say, because shorts is really such a different mode of artistic expression, there should be a separate canon? Or we could have both. I remember saying to Nick James once, I said, why does Sight and Sound never write about short films? And he said, well, you know, you're an expert on short films. You love short films. And I was like, well, I don't see myself as an advocate of short films. I said, what if you went to a film festival and the most impressive thing you saw was a short? He said, well, you know, if it happens, then we'll do it like that. But it just tends not to happen. And of course, a lot of critics, when they go to festivals, let's say you go to Cannes, you know, you've got your schedule and all this sort of thing. And somebody says, oh, but there's a great short in the Cannes. Oh, you know, I can't see it. And so they wouldn't even sort of expose themselves to that thing. So in terms of, and this is probably going to be something we'll talk about later today in this panel, but in terms of like exposing themselves to the position where they would even consider watching those shorts is another thing. Like I was thinking of all the films that have shown at Cannes in the last 6 years, the only two that I can think of that I would genuinely call masterpieces is Peter Czerkassky's Exquisite Corpus, which was in the Cannes 2 years ago or last year, and Au bord de la monde by Klaus Drexel, which was in the Acide section. Which is like...
Which isn't a short.
Which isn't a short, which is an unofficial kind of parallel section of the festival, which very few people actually... Well, it's very uncovered compared with the other sections. And again, this is my personal taste. There are people who think Tony Erdmann, which showed this year, is a masterpiece of cinema. I'll disagree with them. But as I say, it's like, you know, as short in a documentary. And again, is it because I am being deliberate contrarian and I'm like saying, oh, we've got to look beyond that? Or is it that like there's no reason why a sort of hidden documentary and a short? But Peter Czerkassky is not really a hidden figure. I mean, you know, he's only ever made short films. He's been doing it for 30 years. He's had big retrospectives.
Including a recent one in London at the Close-Up Centre.
Yeah, and so now he's getting to the point where he's becoming acknowledged as a major artistic figure, full stop. To the point that, like, if you're the sort of person who knows all the Turner Prize nominees, and if you like to keep in touch with European, you know, artistic currents, you really should know about Peter Czerkassky. You know, but it's taken him kind of 30 years to sort of get there. But
which you've helped facilitate, of course, by writing about them for Sight and Sound.
It's a symbiotic process. You know, we help each other. You scratch my back, I'll write about you in Sight and Sound. But you know, I said pound for pound, I think he's the greatest filmmaker in the world. And there was this whole thing about, oh, now that Abbas Kiarostami's dead, who's the greatest filmmaker? I said, well, the same as before. It's, to me, Czerkassky. But it kind of shows. But again, he's Austrian. If Peter Czerkassky was British, what would he? You know,
how many filmmakers? To come back to your earlier point about, at least in the UK, shorts being primarily a way of like a stepping stone, and once you graduate to feature films, very few look back and dip back into the creative process of creating shorts. I know Shane Meadows made a point a few years back of going back to basics and keeping it real and making very, very small budget low budget short films. There's very few filmmakers though who make that graduation to features and then also feel equally comfortable going back. The only one I can think of, and again I think you mentioned Chikaski, I think this guy may have a claim of being the best current living filmmaker, Sergei Loznitsa, who made a film commissioned by Vila de Conde a few years back, shot in Braga. But he's kind of the only figure I think who feels, to me, seems as comfortable working within non-fiction realms, fiction realms and shorts, and that somebody who kind of insists upon a certain level of autonomy with regard to how long his films are. He's made films that are 2 hours long, non-fiction stuff, and also made films that are 15-minute commissioned shorts.
He's also very fond of a commission.
Yes, of course.
And I think as soon as I think he has antennae that go out, and as soon as like the word commission is spoken in any room in the world, he's like, he somehow has a sixth sense about it, which is terrific for him. And it's if this results in more films by Sergei Loznitsa being made, that's great. And also he's doing fiction films. He's currently working on his third fiction film. But here we are in Portugal, and Miguel Gomez. He has, Arabian Nights is 8 hours, 9 hours, but also felt like 9 when I watched the first part. He did that film where it's the voice of Angela Merkel, and what's it called? The one where it's
Redemption.
Yeah. Where it's
Jean-Pierre Rem writing to Nicolas Sarkozy.
Yeah,
and stuff.
and that is an example of somebody who, again, as you say, it's like amphibious. He can do like quasi-documentary, he can do a short, and if he has an idea, which it's like a novelist, if you're like, I have an idea, and maybe it's a short story, maybe it's a novel. Like I just this morning read a short story by Graham Greene, which was obviously kind of a dry run for Brighton Rock, but Graham Greene would write short stories all the way through his life, and to me, it's artistic confidence backed up by the support of being able to actually do it.
Autonomy and
like obviously
the ability to do
if Loznitsa says, by the way, chaps, my next film's going to be 68 hours long, he could do that. And if he says, and by the way, chaps, my next film is 10 seconds long, he could do it, and it would be promoted, and a thing would be done from that. But again, Loznitsa's, it's taken him 25 years to be able to do that. But what I kind of hope is that younger filmmakers just look at that and don't fall into the trap of saying, my ambition is to make a Jason Statham film. Nothing against Jason Statham, I don't know why I brought him up, but my ambition is to end up in Hollywood or whatever it is, and short, I'll get BAFTA nominated, all that kind of thing. Because if you look back and see who actually has won, like even if you look at who's won the Palme d'Or at Cannes for shorts, most of them that becomes an albatross around their neck. It's like, they won the Palme d'Or. It's like, again, here we are in Portugal, and Raul Salavisha has won the Palme d'Or and the Golden Bear with different shorts, and he's just done his first full-length film, Montaña.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to be one who's going to be able to, and he's only like...
and he's shooting his second feature-length short in South America at the moment.
So there's somebody who is, I'm sure he'll never stop doing shorts, partly because I'm sure he'd love to win the Golden Lion.
And he shot Montaña on 35mm.
Yeah. But again, he goes into the funding mechanisms, and he says, here's my Palme d'Or, and here's my Golden Lion, kind of thing. And it's like, I always say to people, which director under the age of 40 has a Golden Lion and a Palme d'Or? So if you don't get it right, you're going to buy me a drink. so Salavisha is definitely a good one in my book. But yeah, as I say, it's hopefully. What you want is for what we want is for younger people to be coming into cinema, because these days, if you're a bright 20-year-old with artistic ideas, maybe you're going to write a video game, maybe you're going to go into that world, because there's lots of money in video games, as we keep hearing. Maybe you're going to go into television, and the magic of the binge watching and the DVD box set. The only way that cinema is going to survive and continue, and the death of cinema, we're going to sound like Peter Greenaway, but like the death of cinema is constantly upon us. It seems to die and come back to life more often than something from The Walking Dead. And the only way cinema will die if like the bright 20-year-old sort of says, why would I want to do that? It's for boring old fuddy-duddy farts, Or we want to get the people where somebody at 50 says, I have an idea, I have an expression, and find a way to do it. But if this is getting into a different subject. But if we kind of rely on the film schools and say this is where cinema comes from, and this is what you're going to be taught. I just wonder how many people come from film schools and say, I want to spend the rest of my career doing
Well, I
doing short film.
remember you saying to me in your typically facetious way that film schools only enable mediocrity or facilitate mediocrity. Is that a statement that you would stand by?
Well, it depends. Like mediocre, it's if it means like kind of average and like a tendency towards the mean. I mean, if it like mediocre is often used as a sort of to mean like bad. You know?
I mean, my skepticism with regard to so-called film schools and their proliferation and the expense, like massive expense involved in attending them, is having never attended one myself, is how closely connected they are to other disciplines. You know, critical disciplines, intellectual disciplines. How closely are they related to cinema history on an educational level? You know, and what constitutes that film history? You know, like
well, Battleship Potemkin
there's this Citizen Kane. There's this assumption, I think, that cinema is suddenly under crisis, and it's an unprecedented moment because of the digitization and democratization of the medium, but maybe it's more useful to think of it as something that was always kind of shape-shifting in relation to history. You know, it's not this kind of fixed 100-year-old medium that is now suddenly going to have to expand its horizons. It's always been the case that it's always been this unstable process. I think that's the only way we can and should kind of approach history in general and of that of the cinema and specifically.
So that's like what you're saying is that film schools should teach differently, but they should still exist. I mean, what I look at is like when I look at the filmmakers that I like, even if you just look at British ones, when I look down the list, it's actually very unusual for the ones that I would think were the distinctive filmmakers to have ever gone to any kind of film school.
And
like Shane Meadows, who you mentioned, like famously kind of borrowed stroke stole a camera.
Yeah.
And with his pals, got dressed up in daft wigs, and the next thing he sort of taught himself how to make film.
And let's bring it back to somebody who predominantly is making shorts, Igor Bazinovic, whose work is also, you know, his background isn't in cinema per se. I think he graduated in philosophy. And, you know, I know that you're a big fan of his work, as am I, from the little I've seen of it. And he's self-taught. And so there's something to be said. And also, you know, I'm drawn to that level of autonomy that allows people like, you know, James Benning is another filmmaker who will not really give any kind of regard to length and has a level of autonomy to do that because, I mean, autonomy in terms of his relationship to the industry and the festival circuit, but also on a practical level, on a local, intimate level, he's making films that is what we might call just point and shoot. It's a one-man crew, and I know that Bazinovic is also working in similar an environment similar to that, and I'm drawn to that kind of practice because I'm those kinds of, you know, Patrick Healer, who has made shorts in the past, hasn't made a film since 2010 or 2010. I'm drawn to that because that's the kind of, you know, I'm a writer, I identify myself as such, so I'm interested in those kinds of creative environments and what they can and cannot produce.
Well, I think with Bazinovic, it kind of also shows because his films are often very, very funny. Sometimes they're like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and they're basically comedy experimental shorts.
Yeah.
I can't think of very many filmmakers. I mean, there are funny shorts out there, obviously, that people do, and I'm going to mention one in a second. But with Bazinovic, humour is there, and it's like he's not afraid to put a lot of humour into his films. And as I say, if you watch shorts after shorts, particularly experimental shorts, any humour is. It's like I was at Edinburgh and they showed a series of shorts from the mid-70s, and one of them was Owen Landau, Landau, and it was absolutely hilarious. It was the last one in the programme, and everybody was just, you know, they'd been so. Had their brains scrambled by
engulfed in self-serious
alternative realities,
experimentation,
and all of a sudden you get one, and it's like within seconds everybody's laughing, and therefore it's okay to laugh.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, oh my God, we've got to respect Land and all that kind of thing. It's like, you know, this guy is brilliant, and he's also very, very funny. And the short I was going to mention, because I was going to, as we kind of move towards the end, is ask you for maybe one or two shorts that you've seen this year that you would particularly recommend, maybe in this festival, maybe not.
In this festival, I saw...
But hold that thought, because I'm going to mention the two that I like particularly, one of which is extraordinarily funny, one of which is not, and I saw them both in Graz. One of them is The French Road by Arthur Summerrader.
Okay.
Which
is funny?
No.
Okay.
It's the shot of the camera goes along a road in Detroit, and you're hearing all sorts of drag racing, and he's like this bumbling Austrian. It actually is quite funny, because he's interviewing all of these like tough drag racers. It's like a sort of avant-garde Fast and the Furious. And you're seeing just like the length of road, and then you hear the sound of racing cars. Saw that in Graz, and also Herbst, Autumn by Mr. Rauchenberger. What's he called? Manfred Rauchenberger?
I'll defer to your authority.
Yeah. And he is the cultural advisor to the former Austrian president or something like this, or the chancellor.
Have you seen it since Graz? Because we mentioned it in our Partycrashers video in Graz.
I haven't seen it since Graz, and I very much hope to see it. And it's 3 minutes short, and it's a little doll, a kind of robot doll that repeats what you say, and the director off screen is reading a Rilke poem, and the doll is trying to repeat it, but he doesn't get it right very often, and the director gets increasingly agitated. And when I was looking at my kind of top 10, top 12 of the year, those two are like a mile clear. I think those two are masterpieces. I can say this, I think they're both masterpieces. I know you don't quite share my enthusiasm for Herbst, but I think those two are absolutely brilliant films.
I've seen it more times than you as well, because I saw it on the opening night of Hamburg Short Film Festival last month, and it was one of many shorts in that film festival's 3-minute short competition, which is a good idea, I think, to create a space for these so-called shorts, 3 minutes or less. And I saw it on the opening ceremony. It was kind of the flagship film, or the film that was chosen to promote that section, if you like, on opening night, and it had the whole auditorium laughing, and I was leading the way, of course, having seen it before, giving everyone permission to laugh. And another film that was on opening night, which is in this festival, is Person, which you have seen.
I have seen.
You saw it in
by
A Coruña.
Girardet and Müller.
Yeah,
which is
most of
it is clips of Jean-Louis Trintignant in various films over the...
Yeah, and again, I like the film a lot. It's similar to the kinds of films that these guys are known to make. Found footage and the gestures between action. I mean, some of it's just empty frames, right, of like a telephone without any sound. And then as the narrative expands, the cinematic language begins to include these gestures, including this actor. And I thought it was like a mashup of moments in which the director isn't talking, like just from one film. Then I realised that it's many films, many different films. At one point he turns into Gregory Peck, because scenes from Gregory Peck's films are included,
and other actors.
And other actors, and then there's passages that are dedicated to the backs of actors' heads. I think it goes on a little bit too long for me, and I would have preferred it had it not gone into Gregory Peck and whatever, because at that point it becomes a little bit arbitrary. Like why Gregory Peck? Why not someone else? Cary Grant.
It is in my competition. I'm going to watch it again, and because as I say, the first time I'm like, it's loads of clips of Trintignant, and now it isn't. It's something else.
Yeah.
But I think now that I kind of know
you think there's an order to its
but again, it's like that's the great thing about shorts. It's not a big deal to sort of watch it 3 or 4 times to absorb. But is that one of the ones that you would pick as your best of the year so far?
It would be. Herbst would be up there, and one that whose world premiere isn't until later in this week at Fid Marseille, that I've had the privilege of seeing a rough cut of. Is called Rust, by Eloy Dominguez Serrin, the Galician filmmaker whose work I had the privilege of introducing and programming at Kino Otok in Isola last month, straight after Hamburg. And, this is a guy who, as I wrote recently in my roundup from Kino Otok in Hamburg, that perhaps the most exciting thing a critic can say of a young filmmaker is that they haven't yet made a truly great work. The implication being that I see potential greatness in him, obviously. That is obvious, when I watch it.
And Rust gets there?
I think what interests me about Eli, I mean, this guy's an endlessly curious filmmaker and interested in things beyond cinema, okay, which I think informs his work to a positive degree, and emerges from his work to a positive degree. But what interests me is that at this very early stage in his career, that we can kind of begin to divide it into different periods. I mean, he made a few shorts and then incorporated these shorts into his first feature-length, 60-minute feature, which I programmed in Kino Otok, called No Cow on the Ice. And that was kind of bringing together his time in Sweden. And then the reason why I also programmed a short after that, Yellow Brick Road, which he made in the Sahara Desert, was that it seemed to me that if No Cow on the Ice had kind of concluded his time in Sweden, this Yellow Brick Road was kind of making conscious point of moving beyond that. And then Rust is very different altogether. He's not actually part of it, and all of his films so far have been about the collision of his film process of making a film and the collision of that with the ongoing reality around that. So the collision, the dissolving, like, you know, the hermetic reality and the extra reality. And Rust, as I said, moves beyond that. He's not part of it. So in some ways, it's kind of his first fictional film, if we like, but it's also a landscape film, and it's to do with this disused factory space. And I look forward to watching that on the big screen. Its world premiere. And
perhaps one for this festival when it comes back for its 25th edition in 2017.
Yeah.
I have to, never mind what day is it, what year is it, that's the question. So, well, thanks for discussing short films, and as I say, I think we've touched on the thing that once you start investigating the world of short films, you realise it's just kind of a gigantic, vast thing, and a little bit daunting, and as you say, maybe
yeah,
canons are useful in some ways.
I feel extremely uncomfortable calling myself an expert in anything, you know, never mind shorts.
If you had to say best short of all time or favourite short, would you have one?
Oh, dear me.
Because as a film critic, the one thing you're always asked at parties is, come on, what's the best film we've ever seen?
Yeah.
And I always have an answer. So
perhaps
maybe I should say,
All the World's Memory by Alain Resnais. I like that.
Well, I would say Water Rackets by Peter Greenaway.
Okay.
Flying the flag for Britain at a time when flying the flag is a questionable concept. But not in Portugal, because everybody's flying the flag today. So, thank you, Michael, and thank you for watching.
Thanks, Neil.